This is my third SketchUp city I made. I made it around the end of 2013, and the videos are on my YouTube channel right now. They came out in around 2014. It was my third city. It's one of my favourite cities actually, probably my second favourite that I've done. And there's a few reasons why. I think one of the main ones is because it was a big kickoff in the success of my YouTube channel. And I think it's my most viewed video on YouTube actually is from that city, so it's definitely a step up in detail from the old cities I did before that. It introduced quite a few things, including pavements. This was the first city I had with pavements in it. The rest of them used to just be blocks that went straight onto the road. It wasn't really a good look. There was also accurate texture scaling in this one. This was the first city I did where I scaled the textures properly. The ones before that either didn't have proper textures at all, just basic colours, or the textures were not scaled right at all. But these ones, you can definitely see they're scaled a lot better now. I think I set it for around 3 meters high per floor, so you can see all the similar buildings around there that line up in terms of scale, so yeah. A couple of them messed up, but it's not very noticeable. Other than that, it was also sort of just a much larger city, so it's quite a bit bigger than my second city that I made, and definitely bigger than my first. Beyond that, it was also just an increased range in detail and scale of everything really. Lots of detail throughout the city. It's based off the same coastline from City V2, which you saw in the previous video. I have moved the lighthouse, I deleted that, which you can actually see in the video walkthrough that I made a couple of years ago. And also the port area was redesigned from the template to accommodate a bit more land interacting with the water, because I wanted to make a port towards the end of the build. Everything I talk about in this you can probably reference to the videos I made a couple of years ago when I actually built the city, but yeah. As for the road layout, this is pretty random. I did it basically as I went along, mostly improvisation. There are some grid sections, kind of like here and here, but a lot of the majority of them is just curves and curvy roads and stuff like that. But I realise now that that's a lot more time consuming than just doing grids and squares. It was either done with a freehand tool or just the line tool to draw curves, but the problem was I had to draw buildings that line up with the roads, and they just don't look very realistic when you line up the buildings like that. So the grid network was a time-saving trick that I learned really. It's more similar to American style cities when you have a grid layout, which is basically what these cities are based on, not the windy curvy roads that are more random. That was, I think, maybe not the best thing to do, but I did it anyway, and it still turned out alright. I mean, I like the city and the way it looks, but here you can see where the building is not very realistic in shape because it just follows the shape of the block, but oh well. This was the first city I did proper housing estates and things like that. I tried it in City V2, but it just didn't work because it was really lazy effort. But this one is a lot better. It's the first one where I drew out different designs for houses and dotted them around. There's only 2 different house designs in here, but to keep it varied, I varied the colour of the roofs and the heights of each roof as well, as you can see here, just to make it seem a bit more random than just a repetitive housing estate with the exact same houses on each street. I also changed the colour of the paving a bit as well, just to vary it out. And that's the one and only part in the city that has that sort of housing estate thing. Everything else is just a blocky building, but I definitely did it a lot more in City V5, as you can probably see in the videos I released. I didn't like the outskirts of the city and how it blended with the countryside. It instantly turns from grey to green, and it just doesn't really work in my opinion. I guess it could have been worse, but still, that'd be something to try and improve upon. Some points of interest in this city would be the actual scale models I made of different houses throughout the city to kind of show the scaling of things and how or where people could live. So one of the examples is a housing estate here. I scaled this house up and added 2 floors, windows, doors, people, a back garden, and some detailed textures just to give you a sense of how the house would be in the city. And then there's another one. I think I did 2 or 3. There's one over here on the edge of the city. It's a bungalow with a family outside it, and it's still got the same amount of detail, and I think it really helps provide a sense of scale, because you can compare it to the white blocks next to it, and there's just no sense of how big that building is. But as soon as you add these textures and little details, even just one house, it really provides that sort of sense of how massive this city really is when you zoom out, and you can see the enormous scale of it. Really, even though I claim it's a small city, it'd still be massive if you stood inside it. I don't know if there's another one. I put some people on this corner down here on the street, but that's just people and windows. It's not that much detail, not too significant, I guess. There's a couple of boats down here on the docks. I try to avoid adding too high a detail models because they're so small and you wouldn't really see them properly. I added a really big boat in one of the older YouTube videos, but you can see I quickly deleted it because it made it lag way too much. I found another building over here that's scaled up with textures, and this could be like a sort of beachside motel. Some beach pathways here as well. Some palm trees as well, just to add more detail to it. This one's probably a bit too small for a realistic house, but I put it in there anyway just to help provide perspective. I think that's it for the scaled buildings, but I still really like the city, especially like the unique buildings that I made in the center of the city, like the skyscrapers. They've all got a good amount of detail. This one has a sort of rooftop plaza sort of area. The people really help put in the sense of how big this building is. But you can see how the floors actually kind of line up to the size of the people. One over here I think looks quite nice. I quite like it a lot. Some of the textures in this just really work well, like this one with the reflective glass. I think it just looks really good and looks almost photorealistic in some of them. I think that's a really good thing, that if you can find the textures that do that, this would probably be like a mall or a big shopping center or something in the city, along with these skyscrapers. And then this bit would be the sort of Times Square area, the center of the city with colourful posters and all that sort of thing, the cultural hub of the city. And then you've got your tall office buildings and blocky hotels and kind of repetitive windows and stuff like that. I think the building height on this one is around 220 meters high, which is pretty tall, but the tallest one in my newer city is something like 280 to 300 meters high, so you don't want to make the buildings too tall for the size of the city that you're working on, or too small either. So that's another thing to consider, but still. Here's a housing estate thing that I put together. I think it was kind of to save space and time, because it is quite big and it takes up a lot of the city really, especially with green space, but I still think it kind of looks nice with the wooden textures as well. But that's the thing, I mean, when you're making these cities, efficiency is pretty important to kind of save the time, because it's a pretty cumbersome job. It can take hours and hours and hours. That's the thing I definitely considered in my cities after this. So the one after this was City V4, which was, it's on the 3D warehouse now, and I'm going to do a tour of it soon in another episode, but that was the one where I really started to experiment with more efficient techniques on how to make all the grids and the blocks and the buildings and make them more realistic, but also to save time. And then it was properly executed in my 5th and final city, which is now my favourite. So it all worked out like that. And yeah, that's basically the overview of the city and all the points of interest and features and improvements I made over the old ones, and how it led to connections with my newer city. So thanks for watching.